And we are going to start this half hour here with a closer look at the race for the presidency. So joining us now, our ABC White House correspondent, Mary Alice Parks, and NPR White House correspondent and ABC News contributor, Asma Khalid. Welcome to you both. Good morning. Mary Alice, let's start with you because RFK Jr.'s endorsement just happened of Donald Trump. This will be interesting to watch because, we got to figure out which candidate will benefit from that endorsement and where those voters will go, right?
Yeah, exactly. A little bit of split messaging overnight from Democrats. The party saying basically good riddance. He always had the backing of Trump donors. They said that this was inevitable because that's where sort of his support had been. But you saw the Harris team really make a direct appeal to his voters, saying for those who want to turn the page on Trump, there's a place in her campaign for them. It's been interesting to watch both parties kind of argue about who he would hurt more. I do think that the last month after Biden dropped out of the race and Harris took over the ticket, Democrats were then pretty convinced that he was actually going to hurt Trump more. But originally, they fought really hard to keep him off the ballot in key battleground states. The 538 modeling shows that he has actually been pulling almost exactly evenly from Trump and Harris voters. Like you said, it's sort of big question still about where exactly his voters go. I think there's a lot of time still to tell. Do they bother voting at all? It'll be really interesting to see, though, guys, whether he actually goes out and campaigns with Trump as well.
Yeah, that'll be something to watch closely. All right, Asma, to you now, because we saw Kamala Harris using part of her speech at the Democratic National Convention to reintroduce herself to the American public. Did she accomplish that?
Yeah, I mean, she had two main goals coming into the convention, I would say. One was to reintroduce herself, and the second was to prove that she could be commander-in-chief. One thing she did, and I've heard a lot of Kamala Harris speeches these last 5 years, she doesn't talk a whole lot about her personal story. But what she did this week in Chicago was weave her personal story as the daughter of immigrants into the broader American story. I would say it was something that we heard from her that was really distinct. The other thing, though, about reintroducing herself was to prove subtly that a woman could do this job. She doesn't talk a whole lot about gender identity, but I think with her focus on foreign policy and being a commander-in-chief, that was the message she was trying to sell. Look, the Democrats in the room certainly convinced. The big question now is if the broader public is. And I would say the polling is tight. Democrats know the polling is tight. So the next big test will be that debate on September 10th.
Yeah, and Asma, you say the Democrats are convinced. We have the benefit of having Mary Bruce, our chief White House correspondent, here on the desk, because you were there at the DNC all week. And when you look at Kamala Harris's speech, it really seems like it was directed at moderates, at independents, even Republicans.
Yeah, it certainly was. She really was making that appeal to those key independent voters who, of course, are going to be the ones to determine this race. Look, I think for both parties, the bases are pretty cooked. We certainly saw a big display of Democratic unity there. So she was, in that speech, casting herself really as a change agent and making a direct appeal. I think you also heard from Republicans every single night of the convention, which, of course, is intentional, trying to reach out to those Republicans who aren't satisfied with Donald Trump. Yes, and, you had superstars like Oprah Winfrey coming out there and reminding folks she, too, is an independent. And as Mary Alice was saying, they're now reaching out to RFK Jr.'s voters, so they are certainly hoping that they can ride this momentum and get more independents, get those key voters, get some Republicans to come onto the Harris team.
And speaking of Republicans, let's go back to Mary Alice here, because we saw Republicans attacking the Democrats' message of joy and hope, saying that it doesn't pay the bills at the end of the day. So what more can you tell us about the GOP plans to counter that message from Democrats?
Yeah, exactly that. And look, voters have told us all along that the economy is the most important issue in this race. And I think we're going to hear Republicans continue to say that for all this talk of goodwill about protecting freedoms, that doesn't pay the bills. But look, that's a double-edged sword, because as much as Republicans might criticize Democrats for being light on policy, they, too, have been pretty light on economic policy. And the reality is a lot of Republican speeches are also focused on cultural issues. So I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on both of these campaigns to explain more in detail about what exactly they will do if they win the White House again. And it was interesting, too, to watch Harris, be pretty light on the economy. She did not come out and sound like a big progressive there on that stage. When she talked about the economy, she actually really talked about things in terms of Trump, saying things like she would make sure to protect the Affordable Care Act. Guys.
Mary Alice Parks and Asma Khalid, thank you so much for joining us. And Mary Bruce right here on the desk. Thank you all for that.